Renters, have you received a notice of trustee sale? Does it look like the rental property you're living in is being foreclosed on? I know this is stressful, but you may have just hit the lottery. Thanks to SB 1079 in the state of California, there are new regulations that give eligible tenant buyers a superpower that we're going to run through. We're going to give you 5 tips that may turn this into a money-making opportunity or even allow you to buy the property. Hey there, Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates. We have been helping renters and landlords and buyers and sellers navigate these crazy days. And remember, we can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest and up-to-date real estate advice, subscribe to this channel. Things have definitely changed for foreclosures and renters and notification of the foreclosure. Back in the previous bust, renters didn't know they'd be paying their rent on time, suddenly get a knock on the door and the home had been foreclosed on. Why do we know this? We used to do that. We used to list and sell bank-owned homes during the previous bust, and that was our job. We were assigned a listing, and we had to go knock on the door and figure out who was living there, whether it was the occupant, whether it was vacant, or whether it was tenant occupied. And I'll never forget knocking on one door, meeting a mom of 5 children, and she had literally no idea that the property had been foreclosed on. She was a renter paying her rent on time. Now the law states that amongst other notifications that the renter at the property has to receive a notice on the door that the property is about to go to trustee sale. If you've received this notice on your door, this is actually in the last phase of the foreclosure process. A quick run through on the non-judicial foreclosure process in California is the landlord misses a payment. A minimum of 120 days later, the notice of default will be filed. 90 days after that, the notice of sale or notice of trustee sale will be filed. And then as soon as 21 days later, the actual sale will take place. That date is what's on the notice. Bear in mind that that date often gets pushed, and the timeline I've just run through usually takes much longer. And maybe that's why you found this video. You found that notice of trustee sale on the door. As a renter, it is required to have certain language on there, which we're going to run through, and you'll learn more as to what superpower an eligible tenant buyer has. I know this is tiny and tough to read. We have a link below so you can look closer. This is where the magic happens. This is the new language that's required on the notice of trustee sale when it's posted on the door. This is where you'll find the special superpowers that tenants have for the properties that they're living in that are being foreclosed on. So what this says is, notice as tenant, you may have a right to purchase this property after the trustee auction. And if you're the eligible tenant buyer, you can purchase the property if you match the last and highest bid at the trustee auction. We're going to run through exactly what that means. There's 3 steps they mention in here. First, you have 48 hours after trustee sale to call a telephone number, and that's going to have the telephone number for the trustee. Or visit this website. That's going to have the website there. Remember that website so you can track the property. It's going to give you a file number, a case file number, so you can find out directly about this property from the trustee. That's the important part. Step 2, you're going to have to file a written notice of intent to place a bid. We'll talk about that. And the 3rd step is you have to make sure that the trustee receives the bid, receives the money with no more than 45 days after the trustee sale. We'll talk about that as well. So this is where the magic is. And how do you know if you have that superpower? If you're the eligible tenant buyer, well, you got to have 3 things. One is you have to be occupying the real property as your primary residence when the trustee sale happens. You have to be under a rental agreement or lease that was entered through an arm's length transaction with the person who had the mortgage. And the date has to be before the notice of default was filed. Not the notice of trustee sale, but before the notice of default was filed. We can help you figure that number out. The trustee will be able to help you figure that date out as well. And 3, you can't be the person who was on the mortgage or related to that person. That's the other requirement. So if you're a family member of the landlord who is on the mortgage, you're not going to be an eligible tenant buyer. If you meet these 3 things, then you are an eligible tenant buyer and you've got your superpower. What exactly is the trustee sale or the trustee auction that we're talking about in this legislation? Literally, it's an auction that can take place at the courthouse steps where a trustee who is working on behalf of the bank, otherwise known as the beneficiary, has an actual auction to get the highest price for a property that's being foreclosed on. Literally anybody can show up with a pile of cash and put a bid in on a property during a trustee sale. In the old days, the highest bidder would be the one who took that property home. SB 1079 changed things and now allows certain bidders to go ahead and place a bid after the auction has happened, and the eligible tenant buyer is one of those. So what is the superpower the eligible tenant buyer has? Well, thanks to SB 1079, after the trustee sale, if the tenant follows a certain number of steps that we're going to run through, they will be able to match that highest bid from the auction and the property will be theirs. SB 1079 set up a process for other buyers to be able to buy after the sale as well, but they have to get into a bidding war. You do not, as the eligible tenant buyer. You simply match that highest bid and it's yours. So what's the catch? You have 45 days to send in all cash to buy that home. You can't use a traditional lender to buy this property. Don't give up all hope yet if you don't have a big pile of cash sitting around. And even if you're not able to figure out a way to get the cash, there still is one more option for you to potentially make some money off of this deal. Now let's run through those 5 steps, and step number 1 is going to be to track the property. So on that notice you received, you have the trustee's name and you have their website. You have a phone number you can call. You can call in and see if the auction date is going to be pushed. Very often the auction date is pushed, and you're going to need to be prepared for that date to move into the future. Other resources you can turn to would be websites like auction.com or foreclosure.com, another great site to track the auction dates for a property. And step number 2 is to line up your cash. Now, it can be hard to find that much in cash to take down the property, but let's run through a few options. So number 1 would be to turn to any land trusts or any housing groups or tenant unions that maybe have funds set aside to help with this. There's a successful story that we're going to share in a bit that you can read about where a woman was able to get that money from a land trust. You can also potentially turn to family and friends. Maybe you have a rich uncle who has the cash and doesn't mind throwing that in so you can acquire the property. You can also reach out to us. We have a pool of buyers that are able to help out in certain cases. Now, this money isn't going to be gifted to you, but what it may allow you to do is go ahead and put in conventional financing. So the way it would work is somebody puts up the cash. The property is then sitting there waiting for you to get a loan. And once you get that conventional financing, you're able to reimburse the person who lent you the cash in the beginning. There may be private money or hard money companies out there that can do it as well, although that's going to be expensive money to do it that way. Additionally, you can reach out to the highest bidder, and we'll talk about that in a bit as to how you can get in touch with them and see if they're interested in potentially taking the price that you have, floating the property so that you can buy it with traditional financing. Not all is lost if you aren't able to qualify for financing, you're not able to afford the home at the market value. There still is the option to potentially flip that option, and we'll talk about that in step number 5. This is from the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and this is a great website. We have a link below. It dives into SB 1079. It gives you advice how to buy as a tenant, and we agree with most of it, but there's a very important thing that we completely disagree with. No offense to the Sustainable Economies Law Center, but we're going to explain what you do not do. When you're here at this site, you'll hear the story about Jocelyn Foreman. She was able to use SB 1079 to buy her home as an eligible tenant buyer. A great story. They have a great frequently asked questions section. If you can't figure out what the heck I'm saying, come in here and read it, and maybe it'll make more sense. And just as we have 5 steps, they have some pro tips in here too. This is our step number 3, their pro tip number 4. And we're going to caution you against using the advice in their pro tip number 4. No offense to the group here, but there is a downside if you follow this advice. So step number 3 is to go to the sale, and that is actually optional. You really don't have to go to the sale. What they insinuate in this pro tip is that by you showing up and saying that you're going to buy the property and you're the tenant, that they will pay less for the property because it's tenant occupied. These are pros. They already know the property is occupied. It's easy to figure that out, that the property is occupied. You drive by, if the lawn is cut, somebody most likely lives there. And in many cases, they can figure out if it's tenant occupied or owner occupied. We can look at the tax records. Some of them can do a skip trace. There's lots of ways to tell. They already know the property is occupied. By you showing up and loudly declaring you're going to exercise your rights, it gives them a chance to go ahead and show you why you shouldn't be there and bid the property up. And this is exactly what happened to one gentleman I recently spoke to who was an eligible tenant buyer. He followed this advice and showed up and made it loud and clear and handed out papers, and they bid the property up on him, and they told him he shouldn't have done that and they wouldn't have bid it up. So I do not recommend following this pro tip, but it is completely your decision to make. If you do decide to go to the sale, you don't need to record it. You can just stand by and watch. Ultimately, whoever enters the highest bid and is the winner, you can hand them your contact info and let them know that you are an eligible tenant and you intend to exercise your option to be an eligible tenant buyer of the property. But this is even optional. You don't have to do this. Soon enough, they will be knocking on your door to let you know that they won the property. And then step number 4 is the important step of submitting your notice of intent to place a bid within 15 days of the trustee sale. Now, the trustee may have a notice that you can use for this, or they may require you find one on your own. The Sustainable Economies Law Center has this one that you can use, although we do suggest one modification. And of course, you should run this by an attorney. You can customize this on your own, but we would recommend that you don't include this in with your intent to bid. You can use another affidavit, and what this includes, which is not necessary, is number 5. After purchase, I intend to continue to use the property as my primary residence. That may be your intent as the eligible tenant buyer, but in sharing this, it potentially prevents you from being able to exercise an option and make money off of that in lieu of staying in the property. So we'd recommend using the beginning. You can use this notice of intent up here, and then they offer this template of an affidavit by eligible tenant buyer. And if you look closely, you'll see this mirrors the language that we discussed at the beginning about what an eligible tenant buyer is. So this is the form I recommend you use along with those first couple pages for the notice of intent to bid. There is no downside to getting your bid. There's no deposit, no money due. You just need to get this paperwork signed and turned into the trustee within 15 days. And can you believe it? Step 5 already. Within 45 days, you're going to bring in that bucket of cash to close on the property. And you've already either lined it up before the auction or you've been able to line it up after the auction within those 45 days. We ran through in step 2 a few places to turn. And even if you can't line up the cash or you aren't able to afford the financing to take over and buy the house as yours, not all is lost. You still have what's known as an option. You have the option to buy the property, and it is a first right of refusal is another way to look at it. So those 45 days, you're the only one who can buy it, and you've got the dollar amount there set up. And it could be a good discount on the property. So if, for example, maybe it's $1 million property and you've got it tied up with the option to buy it at $750,000 or $800,000. There are investors, we have some who may potentially be interested in helping exercise that option, and they'll give you some money, maybe $25,000 on top for the ability to exercise that option. And all it took was some work by you doing some legwork and making sure you turn in that intent to bid, and you can shop this around. Just be careful and make sure you have an attorney at your side. Do you have more questions about exercising your superpower as an eligible tenant buyer? Leave those questions below. We also have our contact information if you'd like to reach out. And make sure you subscribe to our free weekly email newsletter so you don't miss a single foreclosure update, plus a whole lot more. As a renter, investor, buyer, seller, check out this next video you're not gonna wanna miss. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Christian Walsh, Forever Agent with Wire Associates, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, and we want to hear from you.